Hi, and welcome to another episode of PDA Dad UK. In this episode, I want to look at an issue my daughter has, and it is the occurrence of voices within her head. This became apparent to us probably about 6 to 8 months ago. We had left her eating her dinner in the living room, and we heard this almighty crash. We came down and she had lasagna, and it was coating this wall behind me actually, and running down the wall. Obviously lasagna isn't exactly the neatest of foods, particularly when thrown, and it had come out of nowhere. There was no meltdown, there was no trigger for it. It was just suddenly she threw her food at the wall. We couldn't work out what was going on. After speaking to her, she told us that basically the voice in her head had told her to do it. It's obviously sent some massive alarm bells off in my head. My wife is bipolar and she experiences voices. Obviously voices in your head is associated with a number of mental health related conditions and illnesses. And so it was like, whoa, is this a sign that we're going to be dealing with something bigger than autism? Is something coming to the surface now that we need to really address? I'm very fortunate in that I have a number of autistic friends who are adults. I've obviously interviewed a couple on this page, and they've been incredibly helpful for me to understand what's going on with my daughter. There are times that, as a neurotypical person myself, I can't put myself into her position. I don't know what's going on. I was really worried about this, and was fortunate enough that I could talk to my friends and say, this is really worrying, what's going on? And apparently it's far more common than we realise. A lot of autistic people will hear the voices in their heads. And it got dissected to me in a way that sort of broke it down to an understanding I could relate to. And it's basically that I have an internal monologue in my head. Most people, all people do. We have little conversations with ourselves in our head. When I was putting together some furniture for the garden the other day, and you sit there sort of talking to yourself as you're doing it. Is that going there? Is this going to do this? Does this go here? Oh, I'm an idiot, I put the wrong screw in the wrong place, and I have these conversations and they go on in my head all the time. They're just an internal monologue of thoughts and processes, and it sort of helps you to go through things. I think when you're dealing with stressful situations in particular, you tend to speak to yourself in your head and go through these things. If I'm going to try this, what am I going to do? How's this going to work out? How's this going to affect that person? And one thing that has become apparent is that I'll often have ideas, silly ideas, and it might be that, gee, it'd be funny if the food hit the wall, wouldn't it? Just a thought that pops into your head. And that's what had happened to my daughter. The thought had popped into her head. But the way the autistic brain works is that some autistic people can very much struggle to differentiate between what's that internal monologue and what would be called an auditory hallucination. So they basically translate that internal monologue as being a separate voice. The problem my daughter has is that it's the naughty inverted commas ideas that are the ones that she will act out upon. So for her, it was a thought of, gee, it'd be funny if the food hit the wall, wouldn't it? I wonder what that would look like. And that becomes a voice within her head saying, you should do that. And apparently, and this is what came out of my conversations with my autistic friends, that temptation to follow through, or the need to follow through even, on what the voices are telling you to do is very, very hard to resist. They can be very, very pressing. So I want to have a look a bit further at what these voices are, how they work, when to be alarmed and when not to be alarmed, and how we can work with our kids to work through these issues. So what is an internal monologue? Basically, we've sort of covered this, but I want to go into a little more detail. we will process our surroundings and our experiences and the occurrences in our lives usually by discussing it with ourselves in the head. It's almost like a narrator on a movie. So when you're watching a film with narration, they sort of, when we went in the room and I was really shocked. Or if you like reading a book, books are basically one long monologue of somebody's experience that they're pouring on the paper and turning into a story or a reference to something, whatever the case may be. That's what goes on in our heads, and we can all relate to it. And we'll have crazy ideas. And we have that ability to differentiate between what's just a silly idea in our head and what's something that we should take seriously. We had an experience the other week with somebody known to us who acted in a way that we didn't like. It was very harmful to us personally. Won't go into details. This is not the place for that particular discussion. But you go through a whole load of stuff. Oh, if I had 10 minutes alone in a dark room with that man, I would, And you go through these things, and the vengeful or the anger that's in you. You're like at the injustice of a situation, and you go through a lot of different sort of things of what you could do about it. I'm fortunate that my brain allows me to hear these things in my head and think, okay, yeah, you're overreacting, and that's just not going to help anyone. You're just going to end up having to deal with police and in the end, I'm not somebody who likes to hurt people, and so it's not something that's going to really come about. But you go through this and you process it in your head. For my daughter, her brain process doesn't allow her to necessarily stop and think through consequences. And I think that's a big part of it. I'm aware of what consequences will be. As kids, even more so for a lot of autistic kids, the ability to understand and interpret consequences is something that doesn't exist. So my daughter has a PDA profile, Pathological Demand Avoidance, and the ability to see beyond the next 5 minutes doesn't matter. We looked at things like, using wall charts for my daughter. For many they work, I'm not knocking them, but for my daughter they just don't work because the idea of a reward down the track just doesn't really hold much water. In the red mist, as I call it, that descends when she goes into a meltdown or she's angry, the consequences just aren't even a consideration. And she will act out because they're just not in the picture at all. What's more difficult is that when she has these thoughts, and it can be over something that's just an emotional response to something. If she's angry, the voice will say, hit, lash out. If she has an idea, a good example is she was angry with me. I pulled her up on something and said, you can't do that. I can't even remember what it was. I think it was she wanted some sweets. We're very careful with how we dole sweets out because sugar and colours really affect my daughter. So I was like, no, we're not having sweets today. It's just not happening. You haven't earned them this morning, blah, 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 whatever the reasons may be. And she was furious. She really lashed out. And we managed to calm the situation, and I thought, well, that's that. She said, I'm going to go out to my room to calm down, which is something that she does. She knows that she needs to bring herself back. It's taken a long time to get her to that point, but every now and again she actually just wants to say, I need time out just to be me. And sure, so 5 minutes and thinking to myself, it's gone very quiet. And I think most parents can relate to the idea that silence with kids usually is something to be concerned with. And so I went up to check, and what she'd done is I wear contact lenses, and she'd taken my contact lens solution and she'd spread it all over my bed. And I have a piece of equipment next to my bed that I need to use at night, and she had stretched part of that so that it had broken. And it wasn't a meltdown. It wasn't a lashing out. It was a lashing out, but not in a sort of emotional explosion. She'd thought about it, she considered it, and I was like, what possessed you to do that? And that's the problem. Basically, that idea of revenge and anger that we were talking about before where I've been able to go, that's just going to end in disaster. She can't process that. And because the voice itself is to her a separate voice. So for me, I know they're my thoughts. I know this is just my brain processing what's going on and coming to a resolution. For her, that voice is a separate voice, and it was saying, do this, show him, teach him a lesson, show daddy that he's a bad man, whatever the case may be that was going on in her head at the time. And she responded to those voices by obeying them. And it's a real challenge. And it was, as I say, very alarming when we first discovered it. But I've discovered since, through talking to people and through research online and reading books, this is a really common thing. And in fact, as part of the referral process, part of the paperwork that was sent out to us, explained that voices were very common in autism. And it's actually a fairly common trait. And it becomes more complicated because a lot of autistic kids will use talking as a soothing technique as well. So they may talk themselves to sleep, they may talk through an issue, they sit there bubbling away, whatever the case may be. It's actually part of exactly what goes on in our heads. It's them sort of sorting through things. But when that voice is misinterpreted, it becomes a real problem. And the ability to resist the temptations that they're putting in front of my daughter are almost impossible to resist. So we've had to work strategies out for dealing with this. And again, it came back to speaking to my autistic friends who were able to advise me of what's helped them overcome the issues they've had with dealing with voices. And if someone's telling me to do something stupid, I'd say, go away, I'm not going to do that. If somebody was saying, there's a bridge over there, you should jump off it, that would be fun, I'm going to go, you're an idiot, I'm not going to do that. I'm aware that I'm going to hit the bottom and break a leg or worse. That's ridiculous, I'm going to do that. If somebody says to me, we need some money, let's go rob a liquor store, I'm not going to do it. It's just not going to happen. But for these voices, they're incredibly persuasive. And so what I've said to my daughter is, what you need to do is just talk back to her. And it can be an odd thing for someone to witness, but it's the idea that it's one of the few times I've said you can actually swear. If your voices are telling you to do something bad, you tell them to F off. You tell them to go away. Tell them you're not going to. And I've tried to work in her need for control into that. So for my daughter, being in control of a situation is very important. It's part of the PDA profile. They need to be in control to alleviate the anxiety that's going on within them. So I sort of talk to her about that. It's like, you're the one in charge, not them. You have the ability you can hear the voice, you tell it to go away, you tell it you're not going to do that because you know that something bad's going to happen next because you'll be in trouble or you'll have broken a toy or whatever the particular consequences that may lead to. You're going to end up having to clean the dinner off the wall, or you're going to have a very upset mummy and daddy, and that's sort of how we've had to deal with it. They're still there, but more and more she's learning to sort of say, and she'll tell us she's hearing them. I said, it's the voices. Sometimes I think that's probably a manipulative thing. It's like an excuse. But there are definitely times where, and you can actually sort of see her sort of bang her head sometimes as she's sort of wrestling with what's going on. It's a very difficult thing, and it takes a lot of, I think, patience and understanding to be able to work through it. Once you have that knowledge of what's going on and how it's working, and that this isn't something they can control, it's not a deliberate, thought through thing they're going through that says, I'm doing this to get this. It's something they can't control. The voice to them is a separate voice, and it's a very commanding voice telling them to go and do something they shouldn't be doing. They may well say positive things as well, but I certainly don't see the consequences of that in the same way. The positive voices don't result in me having to clean dinner off the wall for 2 hours. So it's something that's there, and a lot of kids will experience it. A lot of autistic people will experience it, and it goes throughout all ages. and it's not something that's limited to kids. The difference with kids is the ability to step out of the box, if you like, and see it for what it is and work with it in that way. Kids' brains in general just don't work that way. When should you be concerned? Obviously, when your kid tells you, I'm hearing voices, you're going to be alarmed and you're going to be concerned, and there's good reason to be. It's a concerning thing. First thing to do is talk to your GP. If you're under a paediatrician, talk to your paediatrician. Bring it to the attention of medical professionals, because they'll be able to sort of assess it to some degree and analyse it and come up with some suggestions for how to move forward. That won't necessarily be a fast process. So just as a fact of how the system works in the UK at the moment, it's a very long process to get any assessment done, but depending on who your contacts are and who you're already under, that can be quick or slow. The real key is to look for what this really is. Is it this internal monologue? Is it something further? Are they really experiencing auditory hallucinations? Is this something that is moving into deeper mental health issues? And there's a real need to be aware of that. Autism and other mental health issues in later life are very closely linked. A doctor who was treating my daughter for she'd stubbed her toe at a soft play. He told me that it's so important to start working with her now at this young age to understand the autism and to work through it and deal with it, because untreated and undiagnosed autism in early life often leads to disorders such as bipolar, schizophrenia, other things later on in life. They're all very closely related. Certainly high anxiety and the ability to cope with high anxiety. Autism and anxiety is so closely and intrinsically linked as it is, and a lot of the mental health conditions that come later are very closely related to anxiety and how to deal with it. And so it's definitely something that if you're getting it, talk to someone professional. Do it straight away. It may well be nothing to worry about and something that is just part of being autistic and working through how to get that to work in your particular family situation with your kids, with your friends, or whoever it is that's having these issues. But dealing with it professionally will mean that you've got people who really know what they're on about and talking about, are able to assess and analyse and look at solutions going forward. There's a lot of charities that are available. I'll put them up at the end of this video again if you need to talk to somebody. But like things like Childmind Institute and National Autistic Society are very helpful with giving advice on this, and they've got a lot of resources available that will be able to help. But work with it. If you know that your kid's going through this, if you know someone who's going through this, looking at those sort of techniques of how can you deal with this for yourself, telling, as I say, the only time my daughter's allowed to, it's not the only time she does swear, but the only time I will allow it, and she won't be in trouble for it, is if she's talking to those things, she's saying, go away, just get the F out of my life. I don't want to talk to you right now. I don't want to hear from you. I'm in control of this situation, not you. And sort of taking that authority. There'll be different approaches and different ways that you can deal with it. So that's basically what I've got to say on the issue. As I say, it's far more common than people realise. As it is, 5% of the population, neurotypical or neurodiverse, will experience voices in the head and auditory hallucinations. It's actually not something that's limited to the autistic spectrum or mental health issues necessarily. However, it is far more common when you come into the realm of autism and the spectrum of people under the autistic banner. I'd love to hear from you guys. If you're autistic and you're watching this and you've experienced the voices, I would really love to hear, for my own reference as much as anything else, how you deal with that, how it is that you can sort of take control of that situation, what it's like when you experience them. I'd love to hear it. Please do comment. Please do like this, and please do subscribe to my channel. As I say, and I've said it before, I'm not doing this to make any money or anything like that. This is about getting the message out about autism acceptance and autism understanding, and hopefully making a world in which we can all live very happily together. We're all human beings in the end. So the more people that subscribe to the channel, the more notice it will get, and the more people will be able to discover it and learn about what's actually a massive part of our society, but goes very misunderstood still. So like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.